Hey guys, this is Jason Buff with Portrait Masterclass. So I'm starting my new YouTube channel, and you can see right now I only have 45 subscribers. So wah wah, because I really haven't done much here except for my little time-lapse retouching videos. So what I want to do is really start to get into Photoshop and talk about how I use it and how you can start creating images that are more kind of fine art. And I have kind of, there's some things that I do that are similar to other people, and there's other things that just have come about from using Photoshop for almost, I don't know, like 20 years, 15 years, something like, nah, it's got to be like 20 years at least. I started in version 2 and then quickly moved into version 3, and the rest was history. So what I'm going to do today is I want to talk about how I use Camera Raw, because I've seen a lot of people use it in a very kind of quick way to render out their raw files, but I haven't seen a whole lot of people use them in the same way that I use them, which is really kind of like trying to extract or kind of like squeeze all the information out of the raw image while you're really trying to figure out what your image is. Now, when I do my photo shoots, I typically have kind of an idea in mind of what I'm trying to create, but I also love the kind of, like, if you want to call it like jazz improv aspect of shooting. So I have the model kind of like moving around and flowing and doing things that are kind of, a little bit posed, but also a little bit just, trying to capture something unique. And I have the same way of working in Photoshop, which is kind of improvisational. I don't know exactly what I'm going for, but I'm going to throw a lot of different things. It's like throwing pasta at the wall and seeing what sticks. So it just is my personality, and a lot of people don't like to edit like this, but if you do, then you're going to be able to take advantage of that part of your personality, which is kind of maybe a little bit ADHD, maybe a little bit, not so organized, and just really vibing off how the image looks and how it feels to you. So what I'm going to do is, all these images are straight out of my camera, so they don't have any processing or anything to them. The really interesting thing about RAW files is that it's just pure data. It's not like a JPEG file that's kind of like set in stone. You can do so much with your RAW files. Whenever I get started on an image, I try to really bring out all the luminance information. There's, what you're seeing right now is just the tip of the iceberg. So let's bring up this one image. This is from my photo shoot from a workshop in Colorado Springs from 2020. And so this is basically just a softbox hitting her from the left, and then a CTO gel, a flash with a CTO gel. That means color temperature orange, for those of you who haven't worked with gels before. But it basically is just a flash that has a natural daylight balance, and you're just changing it to more of a incandescent balance. And so whenever I'm working with an image like this, what I'm trying to do is kind of create a contrast between the two white balances. So anyway, I just have, I really love how this image came out. I love her expression and everything. But looking at this, I know there's a whole lot more information in this file. So what I'm going to do is just double click on this and get started, open it up in Photoshop. And here's a beautiful picture of Rose, which I also have a tutorial for anybody who's interested in that in my Facebook group. Okay, so when I work with a raw file, what I want to do is just bring out all the information that's in there. So the very first thing that I'm going to do is actually just create a straight out of image shot, and that's going to be my base layer. So what I want to do is I'm going to click Shift, and you'll see down here, if I hit Shift, it'll say Open Object. If I take that off, it says Open Image. So I'm going to do Open Object. And what's going to happen is it's going to open it up as a smart object. And it's really important to start out with this smart object because you want to remain linked to your raw file. So what I'm going to do is create a copy of that. And now I'm going to I'm going to click on the top one and start editing that. Now, for some of you guys who can already tell me what's going to happen here if I start playing with that. So I'm going to move this over to, just kind of blow out the yellows and everything. And I just want to show you what happens. So if I just make a copy of it, you see, it's going to change both of the files because they are basically the same thing. It's just a clone of the same thing, one on top of the other. In order to have this be a new file on top, I would have to do new smart object via copy, which would give me a completely new smart object that would be linked to the raw file. The problem with that is you're creating a lot more information that's going to be in your Photoshop file. So I try to keep my Photoshop, because I use hundreds of layers, and you know, when I'm doing editing, I typically will have, you know, hundreds and hundreds of different layers if I was to keep them, but I try to kind of like compact things in together so that I don't have so many files here. Just with time, you kind of realize when you can kind of move on, and you don't have to save absolutely everything, every effect, every version of the image. You can just start kind of like compressing the image back down to one basic image. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to actually just hit Control or Command J, or if you want to, another way is just to drag it down here and create a copy. And now I'm going to leave this guy as he is, but I'm going to make him a rasterized layer. So this basically just means that this is just an image layer now. If I double click on it, it's not going to have anything there. It's just got this dialog box that comes up on any layer. So when what I'm going to do is now open this guy back up in RAW and do just a very basic edit. So when I'm trying to extract the information, when I'm trying to get the style that I really like, the first thing that I'm going to do is bring down the contrast a little bit. Try not to really touch the exposure unless I really have to. So bring this guy down. Highlights, I'm going to bring those down so you can see on her face that the irony with bringing, you know, well, it's not really the irony, but I get, you know, you can see more of the highlights if you bring them down. So now you can see more of a contrast on her face. If you bring it way up, it's just going to be blown out. So I always take down the highlights, bring up the shadows a little bit because you want the information from the shadows to come out, especially in these images that are very dark. The whites, I just want to bring those up just a touch, just to bring, there's something that happens with the life of the image. It just kind of comes to life when you bring the whites up just a little bit. And you want to make sure in the histogram that you don't go too far. And I usually like to have a pretty safe zone here. So I just bring it up a little bit. It just kind of makes it pop a little. And the blacks, that's just if you want to have more detail again in the, you know, it's kind of like bringing up the shadows. So you're just bringing up the black. You can see on the histogram here what's happening. So I'm just bringing that up just a little bit. And remember, when you get into the grading and the final phase of editing something, you can always take things back down. But what I want to do is really get all the information out of my raw image here. So clarity on this one, let's see, let's get really close. And this is really well focused. I'm shooting with an f9 at 160, ISO 100, 35 millimeter, my Sigma art. So this is really nicely focused. And so I can bring up the clarity a little bit if I want to. I don't want to go too far. That's kind of like a, you know, beginner's mistake is to just like go crazy with your clarity. Dehaze really doesn't, maybe bring it down a little bit. I'm just kind of eyeballing it. I don't really know what's going to work or not. Okay, vibrance, I'll bring that up just a little. And then saturation. +2. I'm not looking at the numbers here, I'm just looking at the image. And so I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And so now we have our first version edited. Okay, so I have that, and now I'm going to make another copy. And again, I'm going to do rasterize layer and go in and click, and I'm going to do another version of this. So I don't really want to edit much the grading. I don't want to change my colors on this. I want to kind of create what I had in studio with this first edit. So I'm just going to go through and play around. I'm just going to go back and forth with these guys and see if I get anything that I find interesting. Now that I have my base edit there, I can kind of play a little bit more with this. So I like her skin tone a little more like that. Exposure, I might take that down just a little bit and see what kind of interesting combinations I can create here. So bring the whites up just a little bit. I'm just kind of trying to find different options, pretending like I made different choices. You know, it's like you can go back in your life and make different choices with this. You know? So, okay, I'm just going to redo these, and I'm just eyeballing everything. But eventually you're going to get kind of different looks. And then, so I'm going to click OK. And it's just going to be slightly different here. There you go. All right, do another one. And so what I'll typically do also is I really love presets. I have a lot of presets that I've bought, and I don't have any problem with using somebody else's preset. You know, I just use everything very sparingly. You know, I don't use like one thing. I'll take something from one place or whatever, and then I've got a ton of my own presets, which at some point I'll probably package or do something with it. So I have over here everything that says Jabu. These are all my presets. So I have a couple that I use a lot. One of them is this one called Carnival. So let me see what that does to it. And I don't really know what's going to happen on it. Okay, that's interesting. Just make it a little more green, a little more contrasty. I think that's interesting. So let me see. Okay, I don't have to, you know, since I'm doing multiple versions of this, I can just kind of click that and say, okay, that's interesting. I'll put that in. I might use it, I might not. So let me try another one. Open this guy up. I'm going to rasterize. Always remember to rasterize. And, you know, sometimes you can just select the information in the blacks if you just want to do that, and then just kind of make it so that when you have that layer that you're just seeing that dark part. So I have one called Jabu 6. Everybody makes fun of Jabu 6 because it's like one I use all the time. And in this case, it's a little dark. So Jabu 6.1 is a little lighter. And I can just adjust these if I want to, you know, here. So I'll bring this down. Every image is different, so the changes that you make here are really going to depend on what the image is that you're working with. But let me just go in here. And what I can also do is I'll typically put sharpening at 100 and detail at 0, and then click Alt or Option and bring up my masking. And that way we really kind of are focused on the areas that we want to sharpen. Okay, so I'm just going to leave it like this for now. And now I'm going to start kind of taking out some of the things that I really want to extract from the image. So I'm going to make another copy. And these are all going to be part of what forms the base image. Basically is the image that I start with. But I also want to extract a few things. So one of the things that I do is I try to push everything in kind of the opposite way. So I'll have contrast, I'll push that all the way down, highlights all the way down, shadows all the way up, whites all the way down, blacks all the way up, and I get kind of this gray looking image. I can even kind of bring the contrast up if I want to. And what I'm going to do is use this to really bring out the information on the opposite side. So all the information that's in the shadows, all the information that's in the highlights, everything is here. So I'm going to click OK. And now I'm going to do another one that's basically for the eyes and for things that I want to really bring out more detail in. So rasterize that. And now I'm going to focus on her eyes. So I'm going to zoom in. And I want to get as much detail out of her eyes as I possibly can. And like I said, this is shot at f9, so we've got plenty of detail there. So I'm going to play around with my contrast. I'm going to go through and just kind of like move all these guys around just to try and see what is going to help me bring out her eyes. There we go, bring out the whites. That helped. The only thing I'm focused on is right here. Bring down the blacks a little bit. It's really important when you're working with eyes to have this nice contrast between light, then dark, then light, then dark, light, dark, and then the highlight. So the more that you can kind of emphasize that, the better off you're going to be. Now I also want to bring up the colors, and I'll try the vibrance as well. And only in the eyes I can bring up the detail, because watch what happens when I bring up the detail. It's going to give you all these little dots. And so I can just bring up the detail a little bit in the eyes, because I don't mind those dots in the eyes. All this information that's in the iris is actually looks pretty decent with that. And take off noise reduction. And so I'm just going to leave it like that. And that'll be kind of my eye layer. Now the last thing that I'm going to do is I can do, a lot of different, I can take a lot of different information out of here. But I'm going to make a copy of this. But for the sake of time, I'm just going to show you the main things. Rasterize. Now, what I want to do is I want to show you guys something that's really interesting. And I'm just going to use this. I'm going to save this out, and I'm going to use it in a second. I'm not going to use it yet. But what I want to create is just a highlight image, a highlight, a version of this that just shows the highlighted part of her face. So, and everybody's, whenever I'm taking a picture and looking at the texture of the skin, there's always 4 different parts of the skin. One is the highlight, which is basically the skin. If it has any sort of moisture or anything, it's going to reflect that, the flash back like a mirror. Especially if you're working with models who have darker skin. It's almost like looking at, say for example, a dark car versus a light car. A dark car is going to have more of a mirror to it. So I want to have that highlight, then I want to have the part of her face that's just the illuminated part, and then the shadows that are kind of the light, soft shadows, and then the darker shadows. So those are the 4 areas that I try to focus on. And when I'm looking at an image, I'm always trying to break it up. When the editing part is breaking up all of those different parts of the image, breaking up the RGB, doing frequency separation where you're breaking up the texture and the tone and all these things, and then later putting it all back together. So you take it away, you basically go in and extract all these things, and then you put them back together in the end. So what I want to extract here is this highlight information that I can't really see here. So let me see if I can just get this highlight. And I'm going to take down my exposure. You can kind of see it here. So here is this highlight. And I have highlight all the way down, so you can see that nice contrast between the highlight and the shadow on the face. So I'm going to bring up the contrast, and now you can see it really coming out. Bring down the shadows. And this is just one example of what you can do. Now the whites you're going to want to have up like this. And the more information, the better. So you don't want to blow out these highlights here. So let me bring that down just a little more. And the blacks, I can bring those down. You want to have a nice kind of gradient here too. So you don't want it to be too much. But here basically is kind of what I'm going for, is we have that really nice contrast between the highlight part of the skin and then how it kind of drops off into the dark parts of the skin. And you can do this with your image after you've just started editing the image, but I like to do things like this in RAW because you're still working with that really huge RAW file. Now another thing that you can do over here, especially if you click on black and white, then when you come over here, you only have this option for the colors, the color balance. So if I go down with the reds, you can see that it's only selecting the red parts of the image. I can bring this up. You can see where the flowers are. And this is a way to really get in there. Especially if you're working with the skin, the orange part is typically going to be where the illuminated part, and then the yellow part is going to be where the highlights are. So actually in this one, it's not working out that way, but you can really kind of super select that. So now we have kind of this nice highlight layer. I'm going to bring the exposure down just a little more. Okay, and I'm going to export that. So what happens when I'm editing somebody's skin is typically you'll start to lose the dimensionality. You'll start to lose the highlights. And people's first impulse is usually to dodge and burn and bring that back. But what I like to do is I like to use these images as a way to bring that back using the actual image. So I'll show you how to do that in just a second. So, okay, now we have the eye. I'm going to make a copy of this. Anybody who has ADHD like me will enjoy the way that I jump around. So I wish I learned from me when I was doing this, because I can't follow things in order. Okay, so from this guy, all I wanted to do was extract the eyes, but I'll do that in a second. This guy is everything pulled in the opposite way. This one we'll use in a second too. So the first thing I want to do is to combine these first images that we created. So I'm going to make sure everything is off. And with these guys, I'm going to shift select and take them all down to 0. And so I'm going to go to my first image here, and I'm going to bring that up and just see. It's almost like you're, when you're tuning a guitar and you're just like getting it in the right, finding the right place for it. So I'm just going to go back and forth until it kind of feels right. And this is something that just comes with practice. You just have to do this about 1,000,000 times before you can kind of like feel what's working or what's not working. So I'm just going to put this up 36. You don't actually have to use it if you don't want to. Now this is a darker image, so let me put this at 100% so you can see it. I really like the feeling I get from this. It's obviously too dark, but I like the vibe of it. So I can bring it up to like right around here. And actually, if I want to, I can bring it up even further, but I can try to make it so that more of the lighter colors from below it are coming through, so it's not so dark. So I can double click on this, on the layer here. And if I want to, I can go over to the blend if and just alt click on it and bring this down and let some of those highlights through. So you see how now the highlights are coming through? And that allows me to use this, and I'm going to still have the drama, but I'm also going to have the lightness values of what was below it. In other words, it's not going to overtake the lighter parts of the image that are below it. Okay, so let me try this last one. Bring that up. I'm not sure what this guy has on him. Don't really love that, so I'm just going to leave that at 11. And then I'm going to hit what we call Claw E, or Shift Control Alt, or Shift Command Option E, and make this our base layer. And I'm just going to take all these guys and group them together. We're going to start with this. Okay, now this guy, what we're going to do is we're going to create 2 versions of it. You can put it in a group if you want to. And I'm going to put the top one on soft light. And basically select both of these and bring them down. And this is going to help us really have a little bit more of HDR. It's going to bring up the shadows and everything. It's a really nice way to kind of bring up the detail of the image. So I've got these 2 guys together. I'm going to make the soft light one a little stronger because I'm seeing just too much. I want it to have a little more contrast. Okay, here we go. Then I have this guy on top, which was our eye layer. It doesn't necessarily just have to be our eye layer. We could actually use it for a bunch of different things. So I'm going to create a black mask by clicking Alt or Option, and then paint in the areas that I really want to see come to life here. So I'm just going to click on her eye and start painting that in. I'm just going to do a really fast one here. So I'll paint all that in and then just start painting it out. So I'm hitting X to change that to black, and then I'm just going to paint this back out where I don't want that. So I want my flow to be at about 9. My flow is way too up, guys. Yo, man. What's with your flow? Oh my gosh. Okay, so I'm just going to color this in. This is really kind of a hack job I'm doing here. Usually I want to spend a lot more time with the eyes. I'm going to raise this up to like 20. Okay, and just totally take this down. I don't always do this with the eyes. Sometimes I'll just bring it up by creating a soft light layer and then bringing up the layers. But that is for another class. Okay, so yeah, that looks way too much. So I'm going to take this layer file. You can see that here's what it looks like. And I want to have the top part just a little less. A little less light. So I'm just going to paint over the top part just a little bit. Paint over here. There we go. And then I'm just going to bring the whole thing down. So I'm going to hit Control L, and those whites, I'm just going to bring those down a little bit. So just like this. Okay. And I think that's good. And something else I can do is just paint in some of these other areas that I think might benefit from some drama. So I'm just going to paint with a flow of actually like 5. I just want a little bit of this detail here. So I'm going to just heat up her hair a little bit, hit X, make her hair a little bit, get the flowers a little more illuminated. Just this whole area here on her neck that has the backlight. So we can turn that off, turn it on, and kind of play with it a little bit, see if we, and you can always paint this off. Since we're working with 5, as our flow, we really have plenty of leeway. So if we paint, sometimes I don't have a tablet or anything, so you have to depend upon using the flow like that to not go overboard with things. Okay, so that's good. I'm going to hit Claw E again, Control Shift E, Control Shift Alt E, or Control Command Option E to put all those things together. Okay. And so at this point, we're kind of like getting to our starting point with the image. I know it takes a long time to get there, but I want to talk about what I'm doing with this highlight layer. Okay, so let's say that I go through this whole process and I end up cleaning the skin and making it look perfect. Usually when I do something like that, let's say for example I do I'm just going to do a real quick frequency separation on that. And I typically wouldn't do that yet, but I'm just going to show you how cool this is. So let's say I do frequency separation and I totally just like make this skin like way too smooth. So I'm just gonna overly smooth out her skin. So I'm just hitting F a bunch of times on the tone. Sorry, if you don't know frequency separation, then you have no idea what I'm doing, but you will, trust me. Okay, there we go. So I took a lot of the highlight out of her face, and it's starting to look a little bit like, people who are kind of new to retouching, they do this a lot, which is they basically give you this kind of overly retouched look, which I don't really like. So here's without, here's with. And let's say that you've gone through the whole process. I like to kind of like overdo things and then bring them back to the way they were. So you've retouched everything and you've made it look really nice, but you want to bring back the dimension to the face. So we got this guy again. So what can we do with this guy? What I like to do is I'll go to the channels, and with this, if this is selected, then this will be on like this. So you can really, it doesn't really matter here. I would usually use blue, but I can just click here. And so it's Control click, and I can create a curves layer. And I'm going to, well, not delete that, I'm going to turn that off. And so now this is my layer mask. And so what I can do to put the dimension back in her face, once I kind of got rid of it by retouching, is I can create contrast. I can really bring those highlights back up. So I can bring this up, And now you can see all those highlights are there. And I can take this down. It's a little too much. This isn't really perfect because I haven't actually done any retouching, but it's really nice to be able to have that highlight information that comes from the original image. And if I don't want it to have all that texture on it, all I have to do is blur it a little bit and it'll go away. But I like to take all these different things out of my raw image so I can use them later. And that's one of the things that kind of gives you that ability to get that ultra real looking image that's retouched, but it's still ultra real because you're actually using the image. I use the channels all the time to select things. You know, if you want to select highlights, you can generally select the blue channel and then use the curve layer, or use it as a layer mask on a curves and then mess with the curves. All right, so that's basically how I work with Camera Raw. I hope this is maybe giving you a few little nuggets that are things you haven't seen before, and maybe helped you rethink how you work with raw images and probably show them just a little more respect than what they normally get. All right, guys, I appreciate it. Make sure to subscribe, and don't forget to follow me at jabustudio.com. All right, later.